Thanks, guys. Good as always. Have a seat. So as I get jumped into this series, first of all, I forgot some important notes when I was doing the first service. So repeat after me. No matter how bad this is right now, it's better than it was at 9. So feel good about that. Hey, so I became a Richard Rohr fan, first because I heard a guy talked about Rob Bell. We've showed some of his videos over the years, and he kept writing about this book, Everything Belongs. And I'm a digital guy, and I always wanted to get digital stuff, and this wasn't available digitally until, the last year or two, I think. And drove me nuts. And finally, I just kept getting tired of hearing him talking about it. And so I broke down and I bought a hard copy of this thing. And I got to tell you, now my wiring may be different than yours in terms of personality type and all that. That stuff really does matter in terms of what you like to read and stuff. I've never highlighted a book more than I've highlighted this book. It is deep and profound. And if you read it as fast as you can, it'll be a waste of your time. But if you take it slow and you read through the first chapter and you realize, I have no idea what he was just talking about. And you start over and you read a paragraph and you're like, what is he saying? And you go and read it again and take it deep. I think it'll change your life. I think it'll change the way you think about God. I think it'll change the way you think about yourself. And I think it's just that big of a deal. I also want to tell you that this is because of the nature of the way he writes, it's difficult to teach because it's not linear, for one. It's not like this neat, clean thing. And so as I've been thinking about it all week and looking at how he organized the book, I'm basically going to be kind of covering some themes of each chapter as we move along and help you see some interplay with some scriptures, particularly with the Sermon on the Mount, because we started in on that in the spring, and see where it takes us. But expect through this series to be hitting these similar themes week after week. So the stuff I'm going to tell you this week, you can go and bring up my stuff, Chris, if you want. The stuff that we're going to hit this week, you're going to see next week. And the week after that, because the themes are that way. This stuff is not something you get done immediately. It's something that takes time to sink in. And so that's not it. Or advance a slide or something. I'll let you figure that out. The other thing I want to talk about as we get there is the why behind it. Because I was thinking about today and what I want to say to you. And I got to tell you, I hate it when this happens, but sometimes when I'm trying to prepare for a teaching and stuff, it doesn't come fast. And I hate it when that happens because I like to have it wrapped up soon so I can add to it or take stuff out. And this one, late in the week, I'm sitting there asking myself, why do I want this for you? Why do I want to do this series for Trudy? Why do I want to do this series for Carrie? Why do I want to do this series for Ted and Jaja and Dar and anybody else? Like, to a person, I'm thinking, what is this going to do for them? My heart on this thing, the reason why I want to do this is because I hope that in some way, if I do, and God somehow works with me, that you will be as impacted as I have been by the kind of stuff he's teaching. And not that you're not already wonderful people, because you are, but I just think there's a depth here of being and understanding that if we can get our lives around and build on, it's a qualitative, quantitative, exponentially improved kind of redeemed thing that can happen. So that's my heart behind it, and I apologize up front if I'm a little clumsy and trying to unpack it. It's just the way it is, and I'm going to do the best I can to help you see it and grasp it and understand it because it's profound. And part of the reason I wanted to do it is because there's a recurring issue as a pastor that I run across all the time, and it's what do we do with the junk in our lives And usually the way I know that the junk in our lives is still junk in our lives, even if it was from the distant past, is because when I hear you talk about it or other people talk about it, sometimes that thing that happened 20 years ago, it's like it just happened yesterday. I remember when I first arrived here, back in late 1999. Yeah, I've been here that long. And I was talking to a gal who'd been here for a very long time, wonderful gal. She passed many years ago. But she remembered a really painful time in our church's history when there was a financial crisis that went down in Napa. We're talking 30 years ago now, so somewhere in that neck of the woods. And talking to her, when I remember it was one of the first Wednesday night dinners that we used to have that I went to. And this is like the first time I've met her, shaking her hand. And she goes into about a 10-minute tirade about what happened at that time, 15 years before. And I was like, wait a minute, that happened 15 years ago. And it was a whopper for sure. But other things, horrible things that either we've done, decisions we've made that are so hard for us to live with ourselves. We're like, I just can't get over that. And you carry the shame and the guilt, and you grieve, and it's with you, and it's informing you. It's not getting better. It's not being reconciled like Paul promises this whole cross thing is supposed to do. Or maybe it was done to you, and I know we have stories in here. I know the statistics are true in our church as they are in the world about rape statistics and parental molestation and that kind of thing. I know those are present here. Or you've been victimized in other ways. That stuff lives in our walls. And so the question is, how do we deal with that stuff? And that's where the title of the book, I never forget, everything belongs. Even that stuff belongs. And so now I need to make a quick little note here because I want to clarify this. If you've been around Crosswalk, you know that I don't really believe this way anyway, but I got to state it up front because we could just hear the title of the book and go running for the hills. Because everything belongs could mean to you, especially if you're dealing with a lot of junk in your past, it could mean to you in a church setting especially in a country where a particular theological stream has ruled the day. You could interpret everything belongs as, oh great, he's going to go into this thing where God has a plan and all that stuff that happened to me was exactly how God intended it, and somehow I'm supposed to be okay with that. And I'm telling you, I don't buy that. That's a Calvinistic way of thinking, but I don't think that fully reflects the complexity of God. I think sometimes in reverse, especially with really happy things, we look backwards and we're like, wow, God totally set that up, God's plan. But the reality was that if we're on this side of whatever that thing is, I think the way it works more is like this. Where God's always working a deal for us. God's trying to work things in reconciliation, redemptive ways, all kinds of stuff that's all about God and what God's trying to do in the world. It's all happening. At this particular junction, there could be 100 different alternatives that God can work with. We just happened to find one of them. And we latched onto it, and we ran with it, and it worked, and it was good. And other people who were involved in the mix kind of heard the same spirit, and so they kind of got into it. But it's not a one thing. So, I kind of digress there. I could do a whole series on sovereignty issues, and maybe I will. But all I'm saying is that what he is saying, he is not saying that all the crap you went through in your life, all the things that were done to you, not God's plan. It's not how it works. What he's saying is that stuff happened to you. Your life happened to you. And even the bad stuff that happened to you belongs. And the sooner we stop denying and pretending like it didn't happen, the better off we are. One of the quotes out of the first chapter, Youre says, the most important way is to live and fully accept our reality. It means your past and your present, who you are, where you are, all that. This solution sounds so simple and innocuous that most of us fabricate all kinds of religious trappings to avoid taking up our own inglorious, mundane, and ever-present cross. being real with who we are, where we've come from, what's happened to us, all of it. Everything belongs. And that's a problem, because that's not how we're wired. As human beings, we naturally want to create a dualism where God does his God stuff and we do our stuff, and they're not necessarily connected. And even in our own lives, we have our spiritual times, we have our quiet times, our devotional times, which are fine, they're good, I do them. But then we think, okay, now that I'm done with my devotional time, now I can get on with my life. And we don't realize that it's just life. The whole thing is a spiritual venture. Our past, everything, our present, decisions that we're going to make, all of it, it's all part of the same spiritual quest. And Jesus was pretty clear on this. So to bring you up to speed, the next slide, this kind of gives you a roadmap of where we're going. I want to talk a little about Matthew 4 and 5. Matthew 5 is where the Sermon on the Mount starts. And we started talking about in the spring. I'll talk a little bit briefly about that. But first I want to talk to you about Matthew 4. So Matthew 4, Jesus has this temptation thing, which we looked at a few months ago. He goes on his 40-day camping trip with God, so to speak. We don't know exactly how long he was out there, but it was like a quest. And during that time, he got some things figured out. He got his identity clear, who he is. He got a greater clarification, who is God. He got greater clarification of what are my motives, what am I really about as a person in my ministry, what's going to drive me, is it going to be the things of this earth, is it going to be my ego, title, prestige, power, all that, is that what I'm about, or is there something more? And by the time he came out of that crucible experience, he was ready. Remember who this guy was before he went in. So he got baptized by John the Baptist and had a profound spiritual experience that apparently other people recognize as well. And immediately after that, this guy goes into the woods, or into the wilderness. That guy that went into the wilderness was Jesus. Jesus was poor, dirt poor. He was a carpenter. And if you do much research on how much a carpenter made or how much class a carpenter had back then, it wasn't much. So you had your prostitutes and tax collectors here on the bottom rung, and then you had your carpenters. So what does that mean? It means Jesus, for most of his adult life, knew what it was like to be looked down on. He knew what it was like to be very poor. He knew what it was like to go hungry at night. He knew what it was like to be powerless in the face of the Roman Empire. He knew what it was like even to have the law of God lorded over him, because that was commonplace. He knew there was corruption in the religious institution and clearly in the Roman Empire. He was nothing. And he went out and got turbocharged, got things figured out, comes back, calls some disciples to his side, and then this happens. Jesus traveled throughout the region of Galilee. This is the very end of chapter 4 in Matthew, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. Now that's all fine and good, and probably people were impressed with his charismatic ability to teach the scriptures and all that stuff. But you know what really caught their attention and added some weight to what he said? It's this next sentence. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. Now let me tell you, or let me ask you, if this guy comes along and he's talking some pretty good stuff that makes some sense, but then at the end of his little talk he says, hey, so anybody need some prayer? And you actually take him up on it, and all of a sudden crazy stuff's happening through him, like the Spirit of God is actually healing people. How much is that going to validate the stuff he just said about the kingdom of God? Big time. So he started to become quite famous. News about him spread as far as Syria, and people soon began bringing to him all who were sick. And whatever their sickness or disease, or if they were demon-possessed or epileptic or paralyzed, he healed them all. Large crowds followed him wherever he went. People from Galilee, the 10 towns, Jerusalem, from all over Judea, and from east of the Jordan River. Essentially, Matthew is saying people came from all over the world because of what he was teaching and what he was doing, which all worked together. This whole idea of redeeming, reconciling was already happening. And so Big crowd comes. He goes up on a mountainside near the Sea of Galilee, and he starts to teach. And he's got people that are just like him. Poor, not a lot of education, not a lot of hopes, people with a past, people who are powerless. And he starts off by saying, hey, good news. You feel like bugs. You feel like ants, and people's feet are about to come squash you. But I want to tell you, as horrible as you feel, you are blessed. As soon as he started to say that they're blessed, no matter how much they mourn, no matter how poor they were, how powerless they were, all this stuff, that they were blessed, they realized right away, by contrast, that they had some muck in their lives. So one of the pieces of muck that they may have had, we know because he mentions it. One of the first things he says, God blesses those who are poor. So people were carrying around the muck of poverty. This was messing with their identity and with their relationship with God. They were poor. There it was. It was there. God blesses those who mourn. So you had people with a lot to grieve about. Life expectancy wasn't that great back then. So you had a lot of mourning going on, which, if you're poor and you're mourning because somebody you love just died, it's just one more indication that God really isn't with you. And so when Jesus says that you're blessed, even though this is happening, you realize that you've got some muck in your life that you need to deal with. That's just there. And it's messing with you. And you didn't even know it was messing with you until this guy comes along who has some authority and says, hey, by the way, you're blessed. And you're like, no, I'm not, because I'm poor. Yeah, you are. You're blessed. No, I'm not, because I mourn. And he's like, no, you're not. You're blessed. And those of you who are humble, not because you want to be, but because you've been humbled by your life, your circumstances, by those around you, you feel small. Jesus says, nobody else might think you're much, but I'm telling you, in terms of how God sees you, you're blessed. He goes on, he says, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Oh boy, I'm going to be in trouble here with this permanent marker. For those of you who are hunger, which is just one more thing that you're a loser. In that world, they're like, okay, because people who are successful don't go hungry unless they're dieting. And so if you're hungry, that must mean God's not really with you. So you feel like a loser. That's your muck. And Jesus is saying, no, you're blessed. No matter what you tell yourself, no matter what amount of muck you have, you're blessed. Those who are merciful. You know what successful, strong, powerful people call merciful people? Wimps. You let people get away with that? That's not how the world works. You lead with an iron fist. You're merciful? That means you're wimpy. It means you're a doormat. And there were people who were merciful for all the right reasons. And they were called doormats. They were called wimps, weak, muck, made to feel bad about this. And Jesus is saying, that's your muck, but I'm here to tell you, God is with you. You're blessed. It's there for you. He goes on and says, those of you who have pure hearts and have been given a hard time for that, those who work for peace, all that stuff. And every time he says that you're blessed for different things, it's like people see the muck that's been there because they've been put down for all these same things, either from the outside or from the inside. Muck that's been there the whole time. And you know what we do with muck? We like to get rid of muck. And so if you don't mind, I need to just tidy up a little bit. I'm just going to move this over here so you don't notice it as much. In fact, sometimes we even do better than that. Sometimes we get a gorgeous blanket like this. Thank you, Brian Hendrickson, for letting us have your blankie for another night. And so sometimes what we do is, especially if it's a nice Spider-Man one like this, is we just cover it up. Now it's not even there. And we go on with our life. We pretend that the muck doesn't exist. But it's just right there, isn't it? Still there. You know, Jesus is doing through this, and he's going to do it repeatedly throughout his entire Sermon on the Mount in different ways, is he's drawn a contrast. This is what's going on in your life, what you're telling yourself, what you've said God is saying about you. And Jesus is saying, I'm just here to clean that up. Let's take a look at the muck, because there's muck. So then he goes on, and we kind of got sidetracked on the whole salt and light verses. It's just like 4 verses, and we spent 12 weeks on it, which was a lot of fun. But the whole salt and light thing was another piece of muck for them. I spelled that right, yeah. Because they thought, out of all the people in the world, that they were unsalty. How could they be salty? They had no influence or power in the world. They felt very small and insignificant. That's their muck. They didn't think they had any potential or any voice in the world. And they didn't think they had any light to shine, so it's just more muck. What do they have to offer the world? Do you see what all the muck starts to do to a person? Makes you feel worse and worse about yourself. It distances you from God, makes you feel like you have no right to participate in communion or any other religious exercise that you're called to do, because you just feel less than. And you feel smaller and smaller. And at every turn, Jesus is saying, you're just missing it. You're blessed. You are salt. You are light. And then he goes on and even does some more. He talks about righteousness, holiness, which, again, if you've been brought up in the United States, especially, there's a fair amount of legalism that's been in our tradition. So listen to what he says. He's not going soft, so he wants to make that clear. But he is going deep. He says, don't misunderstand why I've come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. At this point, the Pharisees, who were the teachers of the law in that neck of the woods, they handled the rural areas up there, they would have maybe given Jesus a standing ovation. Well done, sir. We've been trying to tell people to follow the Bible all these years, and now you're clearly nailing it. And then he says something that made most of the people shake in their boots, and probably made the Pharisees a little bit puffier in their pride. And this sounds so off the charts nuts coming from Jesus, but I'll help you understand what he's getting at. He says, but I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And at that point, the Pharisees were like, yeah, because we're nailing it. But then they also realized he set a different bar even for them. And everybody who has felt scorned by the teachers of the law are thinking to themselves, you've got to be kidding me. Is this a bait and switch? You've been saying blessed, 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 and now you're saying perfect, perfect, perfect. Is that what you're getting at? You got to nail the law that well? That's not what Jesus is saying at all. He's using hyperbole. He's using exaggerated language in the next few things within the last portion of Matthew chapter 5 to make a point. And the big point is this, that we as human beings, we prefer nice, tidy, legalistic boxes to put God in. We like to create rules. We like to interpret laws of God into rules that we can manage so that we can keep it all together. And then once we have the rules in place and feel good about those things, we like to actually worship the rules more than we like to worship God. And we live our life by that, thinking that really is the exercise. It's a contrast between religiosity, which is what any kind of legalism really is born out of, and what religion's really all about. How many of you are atheists? Raise your hand. I'm just kidding. But if you're an atheist or you're an agnostic, God bless you, because I'm one of you. Or if you're a Christian and trying to grow in that, God bless you too. And all of you, the Christian ones especially, you would say, well, of course I have a religion. I've called myself a Christian. But if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you'd be like, I'm not really religious at all. And the truth is you are. You have a religion. It's not really clearly defined as agnosticism necessarily, but in your deciding what you're not quite sure about or what you absolutely don't believe to be true about God, you've created a religious structure. Religion gives us handles. Religion gives us the schema to try to understand God, the paradigms for how we figure out how the whole world and the cosmos works. That's what religion is supposed to do. There's nothing wrong with religion. The problem comes for all of us when we move toward religiosity, which is we start to worship the religion more than the God the religion is trying to help us grasp. Religiosity almost always comes out in hatred and legalism and looking at every other religion that isn't exactly like yours as absolutely false and wrong. I mean, good grief. How much blood has been shed because people are that certain that their doctrine is right? Do you know that one of the splits in the early church, this is interesting, the cracker that you're going to eat today, which, by the way, thank you very much, is gluten-free for those of you who are paying attention. So this cracker, by the looks of it, doesn't appear to have any, if at all, yeast in it, right? How do we know that just looking at it? Because it's flat. Do you know that the church was split? Big brouhahas happened over whether or not communion bread should have yeast in it. No kidding. A major split in the church over yeast. Now, there's theological ties to that, but all of that is to say, maybe we're prone to do this kind of a thing. Maybe we're prone to set it up that way. So Jesus just goes full throttle with this. And for instance, just so you have a picture of this, he talks about anger. He says, you know, you've heard our ancestors were told you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say, so here's a little thing that he does. It's a really cool rhetorical trick that he uses throughout this whole passage. And it's quite theatrical in the way he does it. He starts off, you have heard it said, but now I say. So I just want you to repeat that. You have heard it said, but now I say. You know what Jesus is doing on every turn here? He's saying, okay, I know what your tradition is. I know what box you've created, but I want to give you a new way of thinking about it. Why was Jesus killed? Because he did that kind of stuff. Right out of the gate. You've heard it said by the Pharisees over there, who are here with us today. Thanks for coming. And they've told you that this is the right way to think, but now I'm going to tell you a different thing. And so he goes on about this murder thing. So you've heard it said, you must not murder, and if you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. But I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. What is Jesus doing here? Is he really saying that there is a new measure of perfectionism we have to go after? I'm thinking I called like 5 people an idiot this week. They were all on TV, but still, you know, am I in trouble now? Do I need to confess that before I take communion? Or is Jesus trying to get at something different? Certainly he's not going after a new legalism. He's not. He's helping you recognize that as soon as we create a new law, somebody else is going to come up with a new definition of that. And the whole point is not keeping the law for the law's sake. The whole point is who we are on the inside. Who are we in our relationship with God? Who are we in our beingness is actually coming out in our fruitiness. You understand? So on every turn, he's like taking the Pharisees and pushing them just a little bit further to show the ridiculousness of our religiosity pursuits. Does that make any sense at all? It's more muck. And so we have all this legalism. And you might not think you have it because maybe you're kind of irreligious. And so you've thought to yourself, hey, Pete, I'm kind of new to church. Crosswalk's really the only church I've ever really been involved with, so this one's not me. Oh, yes, it is. You know why I know it's you? Because if I ask you how you feel about yourself as a person, you're going to start saying, well, I got my problems here and there. I need to buff out a few things, but I'm no Osama bin Laden. I'm no Hitler. I'm no whoever, you know, is on your list of people that are the worst of the worst so that you can look better. I know I'm no Saint Mother Teresa, who got sainted today. I know I'm no Mother Teresa, but I know I'm not that guy or that gal. Well, guess what this smacks of? You figured out your own construct, your own way of religiousizing, I've just made that up, to help you understand where you are in the lineup. Legalism. You've just created your own rule. And what Jesus is saying is, if your focus is on the rules, you've already missed the point. There's a couple great quotes. All these show up in my blog today. As Youre put it, God is always bigger than the boxes we build for God, so we should not waste too much time protecting the boxes. See, we want to control things. We want to keep things neat and orderly in our faith. We want to tell ourselves that we can just kind of tidy things up and rake the muck this way and even put it under a fancy blanket because now it somehow doesn't exist if we do that. But it's false. It's not really true. And it does not let us go. This stays with us. No matter how much we deny it, how much we ignore it, it's still there. And it's messing with us. It's messing with our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of God, how we live in the world. And Jesus trying to say, guys, let's just be honest with who you are, where you are, what formed you. How is God working in all of that? And Jesus himself is like the prototype for how this all works out. You know, we look at Jesus, and one of the constructs is, you know, he's fully God, fully human somehow, and that's an incarnation kind of a thing. And I think the great point for us to think about that is that somehow, and seeing this in Jesus, God fully worked in every corner of Jesus' life. That was the point. And in Jesus living that way, he's saying that's the point for you too. That's how it's supposed to go. Now, we don't really like this. We prefer religion. Israel had the same invitation their whole history. Their whole history, starting in Genesis all the way through to the end, is the story of humanity, where we get this invitation to do life with God, do the dance, and it's this wonderful thing. But after a while, we kind of get tired of the dance. We want to have our hands around a little bit more. So we start to do a little bit more with religion that moves into religiosity. And now all of a sudden we're doing things that a generation ago we never thought we would. We're sacrificing our children to the god Moloch to make sure that everything's okay. Somehow we go from relationship to religiosity so fast. And we say that that's our ancestors and not us, but it's not really true, because as a pastor, I hear all kinds of crazy stuff about, you know, I haven't made it to church, and, you know, then this happened, and so now I'm back in church, as if to say, I need to make sure I'm cool with God, so that's why I'm here. And I have a hunch that some of you may have even been brought up that way, that you go to church to keep God on your side, and make sure you're good with God, because you never know. And some of you have been guilted into doing all kinds of good things, really. Reading scriptures, going to Sunday school, praying, devotions, and all that stuff. And yet at the same time, they've been slightly hijacked, because the motivation behind it has been, you'd better. You'd better, you'd better, or else. We kind of like control. We like boxes. But you can't build a big enough box for God. In fact, Youre talks about the stretchiness that Christ brings to our lives. And he says, you know, if your prayer is not enticing you outside your comfort zones, if your Christ is not an occasional threat, you probably need to do some growing up and learning to love. Because the Jesus we follow is always stretching us. Always stretching us. As much as we want to put the muck under the blanket and pretend like it's not there, it's still there. This whole series is a process for you. The good news is I think, actually I'm very confident about this for you, that even though it's a process, I think you're going to get there sometime after Friday. It's going to happen for you sometime after Friday. You know why? Because Friday is a day that we celebrate what this communion's all about. Friday is the day when Jesus died. And the Christ story, Friday is the day of death. We want to get to Sunday without going through Friday. But you can't get to Sunday without Friday. You can't get to resurrection. You can't get to the new experience of life, the transformed thing, without experiencing Friday some first. And in our lives, that's so true. All of this muck that we cart around and hide under a blanket, all of these things smell like death. They smell like Friday. But we try to rake them here and rake them there, trying to make the best of it, trying to pretend that they don't exist, or we're overcome by them and we don't know what to do with the death that lingers within us. We don't know what to do with it. Richard Rohr says this belongs. But it can't do anything for us, and God can't do anything with it so long as we keep raking it, so long as we keep it hidden. We got to go through Friday before we get to Sunday. It is a process. Rohr says we don't think ourselves into new ways of living, we live ourselves into new ways of thinking. So some of this pursuit over the next few weeks is going to help you deal with the muck and realize there's just a different way. By the way, Rohr does give kind of a funny litmus test on how to understand if we're starting to get this or not. This whole new way of being and thinking and really living in relationship with God that impacts every corner of our life. He says if you want a litmus test for people who are living out of one's true self, true self is a Thomas Merton term. It refers to who you can be in your greatest godly potential, given that you have the breath of God in you, living in your particular cultural context with everything that makes you you. That makes us all very unique. That true self, you shining as much as you can with the presence of God working with you in all that makes you you. So time for this mysterious, weird thing that we do called communion. The band's just going to strum a little bit, while you come forward. And there's a cracker represents that somehow this brokenness of Christ is a part of the mystery of God reconciling everything, redeeming, loving you to your wholeness, your fullness. And dipping it in the cup which represents shed blood. This is more than just a symbol of forgiveness of sins. This is deeper than that. And so I pray that as you take it, that even as you feel the crunch and feel it going down your throat, it may start a process or restart a process in you, that the reconciliation of all things is still happening, and somehow it's rooted in this. So come forward, take communion. If you have an offering or a prayer concern for us, drop it in the bucket, and we'll take care of you. Come on down.
there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Grace like rain falls down on me. Hallelujah. All my stains are washed away. They're washed away. Hallelujah. Yeah. Yeah. Hallelujah, grace like rain falls down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains, they're washed away, they're washed away.
So some of the Hasidic masters talked about our muck stuff, which is sort of a brooding over all the junk that's happened to us. And they say, you rake muck this way, you rake muck that way, when all the while you could have been stringing pearls for the joy of heaven. So may today you begin to recognize that you got muck. As one crosswalker just told me in the back, so you let me know that I'm all mucked up. Yes, you are, and so am I. May you realize it, may you own it, may you start to walk through that, wade through it instead of denying it and raking it this way and that. And may that process of allowing God in start to create strings of pearls that brings joy to you, to me, to the world, and to heaven. Go in peace. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week. So some of the Hasidic masters talked about our muck stuff, which is sort of a brooding over all the junk that's happened to us. And they say, you rake muck this way, you rake muck that way, when all the while you could have been stringing pearls for the joy of heaven. So may today you begin to recognize that you got muck. As one crosswalker just told me in the back, so you let me know that I'm all mucked up. Yes, you are, and so am I. May you realize it, may you own it, may you start to walk through that, wade through it instead of denying it and raking it this way and that. And may that process of allowing God in start to create strings of pearls that brings joy to you, to me, to the world, and to heaven. Go in peace. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.